The last thing I heard before the line went dead was my son, Mark, forgetting to hang up the phone. I heard my daughter-in-law, Chloe, sigh, a sound like air leaking from a cheap balloon. "Is he gone?" she asked, her voice dripping with an impatience she never showed to my face. "Finally," Mark mumbled. Then Chloe spoke the words that shattered the quiet evening and the remaining years of my life as I knew it. "It's time, Mark. We need to talk to the agent tomorrow. He's just a burden rattling around in that big house. It's time for him to go to a nursing home." A pause. "He's a failure, you know. He's been a failure his whole life." My hand, holding the old receiver, froze halfway to its cradle. This was just the beginning. I placed the phone down with a gentleness that felt alien to the tremor in my hands. The click was unnervingly soft, a final, quiet punctuation mark on a life I no longer recognized. Failure, burden. The words echoed in the cavernous silence of the house I had built with my own two hands. Every beam, every floorboard, every nail was a testament to a life Chloe had just dismissed in a single, venomous whisper. Ice didn't just spread through my chest, it was a glacier, calving and cracking inside my ribcage. Something fundamental broke in that moment. It wasn't my heart, not in the way it broke when my Eleanor passed. That was a clean, shattering grief. This was different. This was the sickening crunch of betrayal, the discovery that the foundation you'd spent a lifetime pouring was nothing but sand. I stood there in the hallway, the scent of lemon polish and old wood filling my nostrils, a scent that had always meant home, safety. Now it smelled like a mausoleum. My mausoleum, the one they were preparing to empty and sell. I walked into the living room. My reflection in the dark glass of the bay window was a ghost I didn't recognize. An old man, yes, stooped a little, but a failure? I looked past my own image, out into the yard where the old oak tree stood, the one Eleanor and I had planted the day we broke ground. Its branches were thick and strong, reaching for the sky. It had weathered every storm for 50 years. I had thought my family was the same. For the next hour, I did nothing. I just sat in the worn leather armchair, Eleanor's armchair, and let their words play on a loop. Burden, nursing home, failure. Each word was a fresh turn of the knife. I had given them everything. When Mark wanted to go to a private university I couldn't afford, I took on a second job, renovating kitchens on weekends until my back screamed in protest. When he met Chloe and she demanded a wedding that was more a theatrical production than a celebration of love, I drained a significant portion of my savings to give her the fantasy she wanted, because it made my son happy. Or so I thought. I paid the down payment on their first house, a trendy little place in a suburb they couldn't possibly afford on their own. I co-signed the loan, a fact that seemed trivial at the time, a mere formality. My credit was perfect, built on decades of diligence and paying every bill on time. It was the least I could do, I'd told myself. Family helps family. Eleanor would have seen it. She would have seen right through Chloe's saccharine smiles and her expertly feigned interest in my stories. Eleanor had a radar for insincerity. "Be careful, Roy," she'd told me once, long ago after a particularly cloying visit from the then newlyweds. That one's heart is a cash register. I had dismissed it as cynicism. I, the builder, the man of concrete and steel, had missed the most critical flaw in the structure of my own family. The shock began to recede, washed away by a tide of something else. It was cold and hard and utterly clarifying. It wasn't grief, it wasn't even simple anger. It was resolve. A resolve so absolute it felt like a new spine of steel had been forged and installed within me. They thought I was a doddering old fool, a relic to be managed and disposed of. They thought the man who built this house, who ran a successful construction business for 40 years by outthinking and outworking his competitors, was a failure. A slow, cold smile touched my lips in the darkness. It was a grim, unfamiliar feeling. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten who I was. I was Roy Hayes. And Roy Hayes was not going to a nursing home. Roy Hayes was going to war. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I didn't sleep, not really. I just lay in the dark, my mind a whirring engine of calculations and memories. The pain was still there, a low, throbbing ache, but it was no longer a wound. It was fuel. I made coffee, the ritual a small anchor in a world that had come unmoored. As the dark liquid dripped, I walked through the house, my house, touching things. The smooth, worn banister I had carved myself, the fieldstone fireplace I'd built stone by stone, my knuckles raw and bloody for a month. The pencil marks on the doorframe in the kitchen, charting Mark's growth from a small boy into a man who now considered me a burden. I stopped at a photograph on the mantelpiece. It was Eleanor and me 20 years ago on a trip to the coast. We were laughing, squinting in the sun. She looked so alive, so full of the fierce, gentle wisdom I had relied on for 45 years. I picked up the frame, my thumb stroking the cool glass over her smiling face. "You were right, Elle," I whispered to the quiet room. "You were always right. But I'll fix it. I promise you I'll fix it." I knew what I had to do. They saw me as a resource to be drained, an obstacle to be removed. They thought the game was over. They didn't realize I was just about to make my first move. Instead of my usual morning routine of checking the news or tending to the garden, I went to my office. It was the one room in the house that was entirely mine, filled with blueprints, ledgers from my old company, and reference books on everything from structural engineering to contract law. For years, Chloe had referred to it as Dad's dusty old junk room. She had no idea the arsenal it contained. I didn't search for nursing homes. I searched for lawyers. Not just any lawyer. I typed, "Best estate litigation lawyer in the city," into the search bar. The name that came up repeatedly was Arthur Harrison. Harrison, Sons, a firm known for being aggressive, thorough, and fearsomely expensive. Perfect. I called his office at precisely 9 o'clock. A crisp, professional voice answered. I explained in calm, measured tones that I required an urgent consultation regarding my estate and a potential hostile action by family members. I could almost hear the woman's eyebrows raise. They gave me an appointment for 2 o'clock that afternoon. The next call I made was to my bank. I set up an appointment with the branch manager for the following day. I had a joint account with Mark, an account I had established in case of emergencies. I put a substantial amount of money in it every month, an allowance I thought was helping them with bills and their 2 young children. Now I saw it for what it was, a direct pipeline from my life's work into Chloe's bottomless appetite for designer clothes and expensive brunches. The emergency, it turned out, was my own naivete. My phone rang around 10. It was Chloe. Her voice was pure honey, laced with that infuriating, false concern. "Roy, how are you this morning? Mark and I were just talking and we thought we'd pop over this evening. Bring dinner. Won't that be lovely?" The facade began. This was my first test. I had to be the man they thought I was. A little slow, a little lonely, grateful for their attention. I took a breath. "Oh, that sounds wonderful, dear," I said, letting my voice sound a bit frail. "I'd like that very much. It gets quiet here all by myself." "We know, Roy, we know," she cooed. "That's why we worry. We just want to take care of you. We'll be there around 6. Take care of me." The words were poison. I felt a surge of cold fury, but I pushed it down, deep into the recesses of my new resolve. "I'll look forward to it," I said, and hung up. I spent the rest of the morning gathering documents. The deed to the house, my will, bank statements, investment portfolios. I compiled a complete financial picture of Roy Hayes. Not the failure, not the burden, but the man who had meticulously built a small fortune through decades of hard, honest work. The man they were about to try and rob blind. The offices of Harrison, Sons, were the physical embodiment of power. Dark wood, thick carpets that swallowed the sound of your footsteps, the air smelling of old leather and money. Arthur Harrison was a man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't look at me like I was a senior citizen. He looked at me like I was a client, a set of facts and objectives. It was refreshing. I laid it all out. The overheard phone call, the years of financial support, the condescension. the plan to sell my home and put me in a facility. I spoke without emotion, presenting the case as if I were a contractor outlining a new project. When I finished, Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Hayes," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "In my 40 years of practice, I have seen the very worst of human nature, almost always where money and family intersect. Your situation is, regrettably, not uncommon. The question is, what is your desired outcome?" "My desired outcome," I said, meeting his sharp gaze, "is to protect what is mine. To ensure that my son and his wife do not see another penny of my money. And to make it clear, in no uncertain terms, that I am not a man to be trifled with." I paused. "I want to strip them of every expectation, every advantage I have ever given them. I want them to stand on their own 2 feet. Let's see how far they walk." A slow, appreciative smile spread across Arthur Harrison's face. "I see. This is not just about asset protection. This is about a lesson. It's about justice," I corrected him. "Indeed," he said. "Well, Mr. Hayes, let's get to work." For the next 2 hours, we mapped out the strategy. It was a masterpiece of legal and financial maneuvering. Step 1 was the house. Harrison explained the concept of an irrevocable trust. I would transfer the house, my largest single asset, into a trust with me as the sole beneficiary for my lifetime. I would appoint Harrison as the trustee. This would make the house legally untouchable. No one could sell it, mortgage it, or force me out of it without the trustee's consent, and Harrison made it clear his consent would not be forthcoming. Step 2 was the money. We would systematically liquidate certain assets and move the funds into new accounts at a different bank, accounts to which only I and my lawyer had knowledge. The joint account with Mark would be drained and closed. Any credit cards or lines of credit they had access to through me would be canceled. Step 3 was the most brutal and the most elegant. The house they lived in, the one I co-signed the mortgage for. Harrison pulled up the documents online in minutes. As the co-signer with a vested financial interest, I had certain rights. If they were to default, which Harrison suspected they would the moment my financial support vanished, the bank would come after me. "We need to get ahead of that," he said. "We will prepare a formal demand for them to refinance the loans solely in their names within 60 days. They won't be able to. Their credit is likely abysmal without your backing." "And when they can't?" I asked. "Then," Harrison said with a predatory calm, "we offer to buy the note from the bank. We take over the mortgage, you become their landlord, and then you can evict them." The beautiful, vicious simplicity of it was breathtaking. I would own the roof over their heads, and I would take it away. I left Harrison's office feeling lighter than I had in years. The plan was in motion. The paperwork would be drawn up and ready to sign in a week. All I had to do now was play my part. The doddering, grateful old fool. That evening they arrived with bags of takeout from a trendy Italian place. Chloe swept in, kissing the air near my cheek. "Roy, you look tired. Have you been resting?" "As much as an old man can," I said, playing along. "This is so nice of you." Mark shuffled in behind her, carrying the food. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He just mumbled, "Hey, Dad." The guilt was rolling off him in waves. He was a weak man, a follower, but he wasn't pure evil like his wife. In a way, that made his betrayal even worse. He knew it was wrong, and he went along with it anyway. We sat at the dining room table, the table where Eleanor had served 1,000 family dinners. Chloe chattered on about her friends, about a vacation they were planning. "We have to get away, things have just been so stressful." About the children's private school. The conversation was a performance, and I was the captive audience. "You know, Roy," she said, dabbing her mouth with a napkin, "Mark and I have been thinking a lot about the future, about your future." Here it comes, I thought. The opening salvo. "This house is just so much for one person," she continued, her voice syrupy with fake sympathy. "The cleaning, the upkeep, the stairs, we worry about you falling." "I manage all right," I said mildly, pushing pasta around on my plate. "But you shouldn't have to manage," Mark chimed in, finally looking at me. His eyes were pleading, trying to sell the lie. "You should be relaxing, enjoying your retirement." "We've been looking at some lovely places," Chloe said, jumping back in. "Communities, really. With activities and prepared meals and on-site medical staff, you'd make so many new friends." "A place to go and wait to die, you mean?" I took a slow sip of water. "That's a lot to think about," I said, injecting a note of confusion into my voice. "This has been my home for 50 years. "And it's been a wonderful home," Chloe said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Her touch felt like a spider. "But it's also a wonderful asset. Think of the money tied up in this place. Selling it would give you a nest egg that would let you live like a king in one of these communities. No worries for the rest of your life." "Your life," I thought. "Not mine." "You mean it would fund your life?" "We even have a friend, a realtor," Mark added. "She's the best in the area. She could come by, just to give a casual appraisal. No pressure, of course." "Of course," I echoed, letting my shoulders slump a little. I looked from my son's guilty face to my daughter-in-law's greedy one. I suppose it couldn't hurt to look into it, if you think it's for the best." Chloe's smile was blinding. It was the smile of a predator that has successfully cornered its prey. "Oh, Roy, it is. It really is. We just want what's best for you." They left soon after, convinced they had planted the seed and won the day. I stood at the door and waved as their car pulled away, the perfect picture of a sad, lonely old man being cared for by his loving family. The moment the taillights vanished, my smile disappeared. I closed the door, locked it, and walked back to my office. The game was afoot, and they were playing it on a board I had designed, with rules only I understood. The next week was an exercise in covert operations. By day, I was the agreeable, slightly befuddled patriarch. I took their calls. I listened to Chloe gush about a particular retirement village called Golden Meadows, which she described as being like a permanent luxury cruise. I looked at the glossy brochure she dropped off, with its smiling, silver-haired residents playing shuffleboard, and I made the appropriate noises of a man considering his options. "It looks very nice, dear," I'd say, "but it must be terribly expensive." "Don't you worry about a thing, Roy," she'd trill. "The sale of the house will cover everything, with plenty left over." "Plenty left over for you, you mean?" By night, or during the quiet hours of the afternoon, I was a man on a mission. I met with Harrison again and signed the documents creating the Roy Hayes Irrevocable Trust. The house was no longer in my name. It belonged to the trust, and I was its sole lifetime beneficiary. The paperwork was filed with the county clerk's office discreetly by one of Harrison's paralegals. On paper, a casual search would now show the owner of my property as a trust, but they wouldn't think to look. Why would they? The old fool was cooperating. Next, I went to my bank. I sat with the branch manager, a man named Peterson whom I'd known for 20 years. "Clive," I said, "I need to make some structural changes to my finances." I instructed him to close the joint account I held with Mark. First, however, I asked him for a complete record of the last 2 years of transactions. As a co-owner of the account, I was entitled to it. The printout was dozens of pages long. It was a sickening chronicle of their greed, thousands of dollars to high-end department stores. Weekly charges at restaurants where a single meal cost more than I used to make in a week. Payments to a luxury car lease I didn't even know they had. And there, on 3 separate occasions, were payments to a collection of credit card companies. It seemed Chloe was not only spending my money, but she was also in significant debt. I highlighted those entries. An idea, cold and sharp, was beginning to form for the grand finale. I had Clive transfer the remaining Balancia paltry few $100s into a new account in my name only, at a different institution. Then I had him formally close the joint account. The next time Chloe tried to use her debit card linked to that account for her morning latte, it would be declined. A small, petty satisfaction, but satisfying nonetheless. The hardest part was the physical act of preparing for my departure. I couldn't let them see me moving. Harrison had recommended a small, high-end apartment in a new development downtown. It was secure, modern, and blissfully anonymous. I signed the lease under the trust's name. Then, I began to move my life, piece by piece, in secret. I started with the things they would never notice: my old company ledgers, my collection of woodworking tools, the boxes of Eleanor's letters and photographs from the attic. I rented a small storage unit and moved them myself in the trunk of my car over several days. Then came the more personal items. I packed Eleanor's jewelry, her favorite books, the quilt her mother had made that we kept on our bed. I took the photograph from the mantelpiece. I packed a suitcase with my best clothes. I even dug up the small rose bush Eleanor had planted by the back door, wrapping its roots carefully in burlap. I would plant it on my new balcony. A piece of her, a piece of this home, would come with me. Each item I removed was a quiet act of defiance. They thought they were taking my house, but I was hollowing it out from the inside, leaving them with nothing but an empty shell filled with their own avarice. I was curating my life, selecting the parts that mattered and discarding the rest. Discarding them. The realtor, a woman named Tiffany with a smile as bright and hard as a diamond, came for the casual appraisal. Chloe and Mark were there, hovering like vultures. I played my part to perfection. I shuffled along behind them, looking confused as Tiffany talked about staging and curb appeal and maximizing value. "The bones on this place are incredible," Tiffany gushed, looking at the hand-hewn ceiling beams in the living room. "Original custom work like this is so rare. We could list it for $2 million, easy. It'll be snapped up in a week." Chloe's eyes lit up. $2 million. I could see the dollar signs flashing behind her pupils. She was already spending it. A new car, a trip to Europe, a new life built on the rubble of mine. "What do you think, Dad?" Mark asked, his voice strained. "It's a lot of money. It would set you up for life." I looked around the room, at the fireplace where I'd read him bedtime stories, at the window where Eleanor and I had watched the snow fall for 50 winters. I let a tear well up in my eye. It wasn't entirely fake. "It's just so much," I whispered. "But if you think it's right." "It is, Roy. It is," Chloe said, patting my arm again. "Tiffany, let's get the paperwork drawn up. We'll have Roy sign it at a little celebration dinner here next week, a toast to new beginnings." The final provocation, the celebratory dinner. It was more perfect than anything I could have planned. The stage was set. In the days leading up to the dinner, I finalized my retreat. I had my new apartment furnished with simple, tasteful pieces. I arranged for my mail to be forwarded. I transferred the last of my essential personal belongings. The house felt strangely empty now, a stage set for the final act. It was clean, tidy, but its soul was gone. Its soul was with me. The day of the dinner, I received a call from Harrison. "Roy," he said, his voice crisp, "all pieces are in place. The trust is ironclad, the new accounts are secure, and I have prepared a package for you. It contains everything we discussed." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, "for everything." "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Hayes," he replied. "I must say, I have not enjoyed a case this much in a very long time. Break a leg." I smiled. "Oh, I would." The package from Harrison arrived by courier an hour later. It was a thick manila envelope. Inside were several folders. One contained a copy of the new deed, showing the house was the property of the trust. Another contained a formal letter, on Harrison's son's letterhead, outlining the immediate termination of all financial support and the closure of all joint accounts. A third contained the demand for them to refinance their mortgage. And the last folder, that was my own personal touch. It contained the printouts from the joint bank account, with all of Chloe's extravagant purchases highlighted in yellow. And on top, a summary page I had typed up myself, showing the total amount of money I had given them over the last 5 years. It was a staggering figure. Next to it, I had placed a recent copy of Chloe's credit card statements, which Harrison's investigators had legally and easily obtained. The total balance due was $73,421.52. I placed the envelope on the sideboard in the dining room, ready. They arrived at 7, triumphant. Mark carried a ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne. Chloe was wearing a new dress that probably cost $1,000, my $1,000. Tiffany, the realtor, was with them, carrying a leather-bound portfolio with the listing agreement. They were a pack of wolves, coming to sign the death warrant of the old lion. "Roy, you look so smart," Chloe exclaimed as I greeted them at the door. I was wearing a simple suit and tie. I wanted to look dignified for my own liberation. "It's a special occasion, isn't it?" I said, my smile feeling more genuine now. The end was near. We sat at the dining table. I had prepared nothing. There was no food, just the table, the chairs, and 4 water glasses. "Where's dinner, Roy?" Chloe asked, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "I thought we could get to business first," I said calmly. "Then we can celebrate." Tiffany took that as her cue. She opened her portfolio with a flourish. "Well, Roy, this is it. The listing agreement. A formality, really. We've priced it at a very competitive $2.1 million to generate a bidding war. Just sign at the bottom of each page, and we can have the for sale sign on the lawn by morning." She pushed the thick stack of papers and a pen across the table to me. Chloe was beaming, practically vibrating with excitement. Mark was staring at the polished surface of the table, tracing the wood grain with his finger. I folded my hands and looked at them. I let the silence stretch out, thick and heavy. "You know," Chloe said, breaking the quiet with a brittle laugh. She was getting impatient. She poured herself a glass of the champagne they'd brought, not bothering to offer anyone else any. "You've put up a good fight, old man, pretending to be sad about leaving your precious house." I just looked at her. She took a large gulp of champagne, and her eyes turned cruel. The mask was slipping completely. "Let's be honest, Mark," she said, not even looking at me anymore, just talking to her husband. "This is the best thing that could happen to him, and to us." She turned her venomous gaze back to me. "You know, Roy," she said, her voice laced with the condescension of a victor. She was laughing now, a high, sharp sound. "You've really been a failure your whole life." Mark flinched. "Chloe, don't." "What?" she snapped. "It's true. You built this big, drafty house, but what for? You had one son who can barely hold down a job. You worked your fingers to the bone for what? Just for us to sell it. It's the only smart financial decision you'll ever be a part of, and you're not even making it, we are." I let her words hang in the air. Failure. The final nail she thought she was hammering into my coffin. I smiled. A calm, serene smile. It felt wonderful. "A failure?" I asked, my voice quiet, but carrying in the still room. "Is that what you think?" I leaned forward slightly. "Well, let me ask you something, Chloe. How are you going to pay your $73,000 credit card bill without my help?" The laughter died in her throat. Her face went from smug to confused in a heartbeat. "What? What are you talking about?" Mark looked up, his face pale. Tiffany, the realtor, froze with her pen hovering over a notepad. I reached over to the sideboard and picked up the thick manila envelope. I slid it across the table. It landed in front of her with a soft thud. "Why don't you open that?" I said. "Let's call it a celebration of new beginnings." Her hands trembled slightly as she fumbled with the clasp. She pulled out the first folder, the one with my name highlighted on her credit card statements. Her eyes scanned the page, growing wider and wider. She saw the highlighted balances, the late fees, the astronomical interest rate. How did you get this?" she whispered, horrified. "The joint account you've been using as your personal piggy bank for 5 years gave me certain rights, dear," I said smoothly. "Next folder, please." She pulled out the letter from Harrison's sons. Her breath hitched as she read the formal, merciless prose detailing the termination of all financial support. "The joint account has been closed. Your card was declined this morning at the coffee shop, wasn't it?" She looked at me, her face ashen. She had no idea. "Keep going," I urged, my voice still dangerously calm. She pulled out the third folder, the demand to refinance their home. "You have 60 days to secure a new mortgage in your own names," I explained pleasantly. "Given your debt. 2. Income ratio and what I imagine is a non-existent credit score. I wish you the best of luck with that. The banks are so particular these days." Mark finally spoke, his voice a strangled croak. "Dad, what is this? What have you done?" "What have I done?" I asked, turning my gaze to him. "I have simply woken up, son. I am done funding your life. I am done enabling your weakness and her greed." Chloe's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the papers. She pulled out the last document. It was the copy of the deed. She stared at it, her brow furrowed in confusion. Roy Hayes' irrevocable trust. What is this? This is a mistake. There's no mistake, I said. I finally looked at Tiffany, the realtor, whose face was a mask of professional horror. Tiffany, I'm afraid you've wasted a trip. This house is not for sale. It hasn't been for sale for over a week. It is the property of a trust, and as the trustee, I gestured vaguely toward the door. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, would be happy to explain the legal ramifications if you attempt to put a for sale sign on his client's lawn. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a collapsing universe, Chloe's universe. Then, the meltdown began. It started as a low gasp, a sound of utter disbelief. Then her head snapped up and she looked at me, her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You old fool, you senile old bastard, you can't do this to us." She lunged across the table, trying to grab the papers, to rip them up, as if destroying the evidence would undo the reality. I simply moved the envelope out of her reach. "It's already done," I said, my voice flat and final. She turned on Mark, her fury needing a new target. "You!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at him. "This is your fault. You were supposed to handle him. You were supposed to make sure he signed. You useless, weak, pathetic man. You can't do anything right." Mark, who had been sitting there like a stone statue, finally broke. "My fault?" he yelled back, standing up so fast his chair crashed to the floor. "My fault? I told you we were pushing too hard. I told you to back off. But you couldn't wait to get your greedy hands on his money, could you? You never loved me. You just loved what my father could give you." "That's not true," she sobbed, but it was a performance, and the audience was no longer buying it. "Isn't it?" he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "We're ruined, Chloe, ruined. Because you couldn't stand the thought of not having the best of everything. You couldn't stand being married to a man who wasn't rich, so you decided to rob his father." Tiffany, the realtor, had gathered her things with quiet efficiency. "My apologies," she stammered, looking at me. "I seem to have been brought here under false pretenses. I'll see myself out." She practically fled the room, a wise decision. The screaming match between Mark and Chloe devolved into a hurricane of blame and recrimination. All the ugly things that had festered beneath the surface of their marriage came pouring out. His failed business ventures, her secret debts, their mutual contempt. It was raw, hideous, and I watched it all with a profound and chilling detachment. They were destroying each other, right here at my dining room table. I didn't have to lift another finger. Finally, I'd had enough. I stood up. The movement was small, but it cut through their rage-fueled haze. They both stopped and stared at me. I looked at my son, at the wreck of a man he had become. There was no anger left for him, only a deep, sorrowful pity. "You didn't lose a father tonight, Mark," I said, my voice heavy with a finality that echoed in the room. "You gave me away a long time ago, the day you decided her wants were more important than my dignity." Then I looked at Chloe, her face streaked with tears and makeup, her expression one of pure animal hatred. "You called me a failure," I said. "My entire life, I have built things. This house, a business, a family, a reputation. All you have ever done is take. You are a black hole in human form. Enjoy the consequences of your success." I picked up my car keys from the sideboard. I didn't have a bag to pack. Everything that mattered was already safe in my new home. I walked to the front door, the sounds of their renewed arguing already starting up behind me. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cool night air, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. That would have been too emotional. This was a business transaction. An asset had been protected. A liability had been cut loose. As I walked to my car, I heard a crash from inside. Something breaking. It was no longer my problem. Roy Hayes, the failure, the burden, The doddering old fool had just left the building, and he was never, ever coming back. My new apartment was on the 15th floor, with a view of the city lights that spread out like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was smaller than my old office, but it was clean, bright, and blessedly quiet. The air didn't hold 50 years of memories, some of them now tainted. It held only the promise of the future. I walked out onto the balcony. The little rosebush I had dug up was sitting in a new pot, its leaves green against the urban backdrop. I touched one of the buds. It felt like hope. Inside, I unpacked the one box I had brought with me. I placed the framed photograph of Eleanor and me on the new mantelpiece. Her smile seemed to warm the entire room. I poured myself a glass of good bourbon, the kind Chloe always turned her nose up at, and raised it to the picture. "Well, Elle," I said softly, "the house is safe. The wolves are at the door, but it's their own door now." A feeling washed over me that I hadn't felt in years, not since before Eleanor got sick. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was something deeper, something more fundamental. It was peace. It was the profound, soul-deep quiet that comes from taking back control of your own life. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was distant thunder. Harrison handled everything. I received a hysterical, rambling voicemail from Mark, alternating between begging for forgiveness and accusing me of destroying his life. I deleted it without listening to the end. I received a formal, threatening letter from a lawyer Chloe had hired. Harrison replied with a letter of his own that, he dryly informed me, was legally impenetrable and personally insulting. I never heard from her lawyer again. True to Harrison's prediction, they were unable to refinance their house. The bank was only too happy to sell the note to my trust. The eviction notices were served. I heard through Harrison that they were forced to move into a cramped, low-rent apartment across town, selling Chloe's luxury car and most of their possessions to make ends meet. The private schools and fancy brunches were a thing of the past. They were finally living a life they could afford. It was a harsh and unforgiving reality. I, on the other hand, was discovering a new life of my own. I found a small workshop in my new building's basement that residents could use. I started woodworking again, the feel of the plane shaving off thin curls of oak as soothing as a prayer. I made a small bookshelf for my apartment, then a coffee table. The building manager saw my work and commissioned me to build some custom shelving for the lobby. He paid me well. It wasn't about the money, it was about the respect. The feeling of being valued for my skill, not my bank account. I started reconnecting with people Mark and Chloe had pushed me away from. My sister, Clara, who lived 2 states away, had always been wary of Chloe. I called her and told her the whole story. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "Good for you, Roy. It's about time. When are you coming to visit?" I booked a flight for the following month. I even started making new friends. There was a young barista at the coffee shop downstairs who was studying architecture. We would talk for 20 minutes every morning about design and structure. He looked at me with a refreshing lack of pity, seeing not an old man, but a peer with a lifetime of experience. One evening, I was sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. "Hello?" A hesitant voice on the other end. "Dad?" It was Mark. He sounded different, defeated. I know you don't want to talk to me. I get it, but the kids, they miss their grandpa." I was silent for a long moment, looking out at the vast, beautiful city. I thought of my grandchildren, innocent in all of this. "The park by the lake," I said finally. "Saturday, 10 o'clock, just you and them. She is not to be there." "Okay, Dad," he said, his voice thick with relief. "Okay, we'll be there." I didn't know if it was the beginning of a reconciliation. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive him, but I knew that I was no longer making decisions based on their needs, their wants, their manipulations. I was making them on my own terms. I was in control. They thought they were taking my house, my money, my future. They thought my life story was over, and they were just there to write the epilogue. How wrong they were. They stripped me of my illusions, they took the burden of their own greed off my shoulders, and in doing so, they gave me back the one thing I had truly lost: myself. The future looked exactly as bright as I was willing to make it, and for the first time, in a very long time, I was the one holding the blueprints. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.